Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm John Miller, and it's nice to see some of you have returned for what, alas, is our final class about semester at sea. And we're going to focus on the 2015 voyage, which Nancy and Jim, you did not participate in that, but I'm sure that some of the things I will talk about will be very, very familiar to you indeed. Last week, Sharon brought up the fact that during the transatlantic part of our voyage in 2015, when we sailed from Senegal to Brazil, there were 3 lectures that were given on board ship, which I presented to you in the Things for Consideration, which I hope you all received. One of those is a recording I discovered I had, because after I came back from the 2015 voyage, it occurred to me that I think the library recorded a talk which I gave which is essentially the same talk I gave on board ship, except a little bit longer. So when you feel so inclined, it's not required. Of course, this is lifelong learning. There are no exams, and there's no final papers to present. So for all of you, you might enjoy that at your leisure. Several people here who are in the classroom: Charlie Yonkers to my left, and there he is, and Annabelle Lesher over here to my right, and Lynn Randall right here.
Hi there.
And Lois right here. There, good. And for everyone on the screen, over on the left, for all of you, is Nancy Eccleston on the left, her husband Jim Van Arsdale, and for the rest, I think you know everybody else on the screen, Dodie Thune, and Karen, and over there, Peggy.
And Tom is hiding.
Tom's hiding. Welcome, Tom. Glad you're here.
And John, your better half, is over there in the
Of course, she's right here. She is withdrawn from the scene so she can put her feet up on the chair.
She promises to bring her cards next time.
Jim, I had a question for you that I thought you might be able to answer. I noticed on the logo for Semester at Sea, which I have right here, you can't see it, but right on the logo it says since 1963, and that made me recall a student ship that I was on when I was in college, my sophomore year. I took a student ship which was a converted Liberty ship, built I think in probably the 1940s, maybe a little later, and it was a school ship, so to speak. They didn't have courses. It was run by the Holland America Line. And so there was lots of information about what to do when you get to Holland. The trip actually went from New York to Southampton, and then it went on from there. But what I recall vividly was when I arrived my parents drove me up to New York City to the Houston terminal. I think it's Houston, even though it's spelled like it's Houston. And we went out on the platform, and we all discovered, there was a huge Holland America Line ship there. You could see everything up, just went stories up, like it belonged to New York City, the skyscrapers. And we couldn't see the Waterman. SS Waterman was the name of the vessel, and this was the Liberty ship. You had to look down over this platform, and there was this tiny, tiny ship sitting there with all of its gaffs and things that were out to haul not furniture, but cars and artillery, presumably at one point. And I looked down at it. My mother was just devastated. She said, "Oh, my oldest son is going to go on this trip on a ship that just looks like it's so tiny.
Pirates will attack.
Pirates will attack." And since Jim, you have done so many semester at sea voyages, am I correct that Holland America Line was sort of the initiator for the idea of semester at sea? Can you hear me, Jim?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just trying to remember. You know, in my experience, it depends who you talk to in terms of what that exact history is. I was a student, Nancy, as well at Chapman, now University, then Chapman College. The 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 academic part of the program, and I don't know. I'll bet if you talk to someone from Holland America, they might claim the position of the first entity to really think about that and do something with it. Everything in writing was from the perspective of the school. And so the people who are talked about in those things are all Chapman people. And so, I mean, it's like, determining who the first dean of a college in the U.S. was back in the 1600s, and who you talk to as to who gets to claim that. So at any rate, I don't really know the answer to that, except that obviously my first sailing was in 1970 as a student on the ship, and on the Rhine Dam. And the Rhine Dam was a ship that was built in the 30s, was then used throughout the war as a troop carrier across the Atlantic. And so I can remember Nancy and I were doing something on this ship a few years ago, and we're in Nova Scotia at Halifax. In the port, there was a museum. Please. A museum that was about the ships that had come into Halifax. And I noticed that there was a picture of the Rhine Dam there. And so I got a little bit more information about it. And it was it was really interesting to see that. I can't remember what I was going to say now. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought.
Was there a Chinese man who helped sponsor Semester at Sea? That was my understanding of it. The original tour, Tung.
Yeah, I think it was someone named Tung.
Yeah.
Chinese.
C. Y. Tung, he was actually from Taiwan.
Okay.
And he came in, basically, he came in when the ship went from being the Rhine Dam to, it was unknown. And so he stepped in. He was an owner of a shipping company that was out of Taiwan. And fortunately had a ship that would work, that I think he needed. Everyone won in that transaction.
Okay.
But it was a slightly larger ship, which was good for the program because it was trying to grow. It was a newer ship, and so it wasn't as pretty as the Rhine Dam, but the Rhine Dam was really pretty because it was built at a time when I think just about any cruise ship was expected to be very, very nice. Lots of dark wood and a variety of things throughout the ship that were very pretty, I thought. But the next ship, which was the Universe Campus, was newer. So it wasn't as pretty, but it was functionally quite a bit better in the student rooms. All of the rooms actually had their own bathrooms. The Rhine Dam had collective bathrooms where you would walk from your room down the hall to a restroom. And, you know, today, in that world, you could get away with that. In today's world, you really wouldn't be able to. So there were a lot of things like that.
Thank you, Jim. I can assure you that the SS Waterman, which was the converted Liberty ship, their bathrooms were down the hall, and it was quite primitive. But I was so excited to be at sea, and I soon forgot that leaving my parents behind, because as soon as we pulled out from the Houston Street terminal, the first lifeboat drill took place just as we were going under the Verrazano Bridge. And then the voyage took us 14 days from New York to Southampton. And my hunch is that they went due east, absolutely due east, and then turned left, went to port, and headed up to Southampton. I don't know whether there was a storm at sea, or whether, as I have heard, perhaps some of you could confirm this, that the Liberty ships were not in the best shape for sailing in seas that were where the water was unusually cold, that they could break up. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but I was young enough not to be concerned at that point. The captain of the ship, the behavior of the students on board the ship was deplorable. The captain had to get on the microphone and address the whole ship's company and say that this is the worst group of students he has ever had that he's been captain of, that the behavior is unacceptable anywhere. And there were girls and guys, women shacking up in different rooms. And I was thrown out of my room once because I was not wanted. There was a lot of booze. It was a great time. A great time. I had a magnificent time, and I made some friends on board the ship, and they were more interested in things that I was interested in, and we met several times when I was traveling in England all by myself. I had a friend from college who was going to go with me, but we found that our interests weren't the same, and so I essentially hitchhiked all over England and Ireland, and then went over to France and stayed for a while in Paris, and then came home, not by the same student ship, but I was able to substitute the ticket to be able to get on board the Statendam, which was a real passenger ship. It was not a student ship, I'll tell you. It was a difference between night and day. And the only one experience I told Emily about that was that there was a very attractive young woman sitting next to me at the table, and she, I think it was the second meal, she had put her keys to her stateroom underneath my napkin. And being naive, I didn't quite understand what that was all about.
Oh, you forgot
So
your keys.
I opened it up and said, "Oh my gosh, I've got someone's keys here." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And handed it back to her. That was into whatever romance might. I was pretty green, pretty naive, to say the least. But I did keep a sea journal, much as I've done for these two voyages with Semester at Sea. And there it is. I wrote every night on board the ship, and I was a sophomore at the time. And the fact that I seem pretty green in callow youth is manifest abundantly by my writing. But I did it every night religiously. And if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't know who I was back then. That's one of the real powers of writing keeping a journal, any kind of journal. I kept a diary, a journal, almost from my 10th grade till I gave it up when I was in high school. And what a record those are. You know, those little tiny ones with a lock on it. And you lose the key after the first week. and then you break it up and so you can write in it. But it's a really interesting window as a writing exercise of who you were and what the dynamics of the family were like. And it's a fascinating exercise, which I urge every one of you to do. And I haven't had a voyage or anything as exciting as my 2 semester at C1, so I haven't kept up a journal anymore, which I regret. Any of you have done that before? You've kept a journal? Short term only. Okay, short term only. I gave it up in high school because some students got a hold of my journal and they gave it back to me, but I felt, oh gosh, my journal was not filtered. I was talking about everything, my feelings, and not just what the weather was like and what I had for breakfast, like some journals.
So you felt violated.
So I felt violated, and I didn't write it in the beginning, but I've got a whole bookshelf at home of my journals, and it's really fascinating to go back. What were you doing, John, in 1957 on New Year's Day? Well, there it is. Sometimes not much, but other times I would write fairly prolifically. I wanted to, also, I hope some of you had a chance to see the horrific footage of the 2005 voyage of the MV Explorer. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you do, because I send it along with the points for you to consider. And one of the points you might consider is I don't think I ever want to go on a cruise myself. But Nancy, you've have had some interesting experiences with people who did go on that voyage. If I recall, there was a lifelong learner who was on that voyage and who came back to do that voyage again because I think that's just a remarkable story. I think her reason was she wanted to enjoy the voyage without having that whole storm be the kind of central image of what the voyage was about. Do I have that remotely correct, Nancy?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And her name is Anne Shine, and she was a retired businesswoman and described to us those days when they were all huddled in passageways with their life jackets on, and how terrifying it was. I think it was days, maybe it was just hours.
Yeah, it was at least 2 days.
From what I call the 7 days of increasingly rough weather, when a lot of the furniture was moving around, it was far worse than anything we had in 2013. Jim, you would not have slept through this, for sure.
No, actually, I was I have a friend, actually, one of my staff members, I used to work at the, University of Arizona, and one of my staff members was on the ship for that voyage, and in fact was there because I pushed her to go. And I can remember her telling me how utterly terrified she was and how she was the night that it was the worst. She thought she was dying. And I mean, it was very, very scary, I think, to anyone who would have been on board.
Right, yeah.
I visited the ship that summer then as a contingent from the University of Arizona, had a tour, and it was really interesting to hear how from the ship's officer's point of view, it was never as bad as the passengers thought, in that they lost steerage from the bridge, but every ship will have a backup steerage, which is down in the engine room. That one was fully functional because what happened, of course, was that the electronics in the bridge were ruined when the water came in through the window. So it wasn't quite as bad in reality, but people didn't know that, and so that was very, very frightening.
Indeed. Well, thank you. I wanted to also, if you read my, the email I sent out to you, I tried to imitate a little bit of Mark Twain here in my reference to telling stories. I hope you appreciate that. But I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to tell some stories from these two journals, specifically from the journal of the 2015 voyage, which was on a different ship and a very different journey. It was closer, the beginnings of the journey were closer to our own comfort zone, essentially Europe and the Mediterranean. But there was the transatlantic passage from Senegal to Brazil, which was an extraordinary event. And so was for me especially, so was the journey around in the Caribbean. That was new territory for me, and I had the good fortune of an anthropology professor who I had when I was a freshman in college. I admired him, but I was not close to him until he later moved to set up the anthropology department at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And when I found that's where he was, I contacted him, and we became very good friends for the last few years of his life, last 10 years of his life. And I kept a journal of that whole voyage. But I contacted him. His name was Professor Sidney Mintz. And I found out after emailing him back and forth, and after his death, and he died just before we got back home from the 2015 voyage. We were in correspondence on board ship. He was an expert in all things Caribbean. He was considered to be the dean of Caribbean anthropologists. And when I discovered after his death that I had all of these emails, I put them together into a book about him and about our conversations back and forth over several years. And he was kind enough to give me a tutorial about all things Caribbean at his home, and which was extremely valuable to me. He introduced me to a number of poets and writers that I wanted to bring up in my class, and I will never forget his kindness to me. I'd like to go back to some things that I think I should really mention to you, and that is the experience of part of the night to remember on board our ship. I'm going to read it to you. As I said, and this story doesn't have any stretchers in it. This is all true. So I'm going to read you the story. Hope you'll enjoy it. I entitled it "A Night to Remember." If the night before last was a rough night, last night topped it by a very wide margin. After an auspicious dawn, the weather gradually deteriorated throughout the day. The ocean swells became confused, causing the vessel to pitch fore and aft, while also rolling from side to side. Crab-like, we corkscrewed through the seas. By the time the lunch hour arrived, the pink-tinged white puffy clouds of dawn gave way to periodic line squalls, some of them with heavy rain, heavy enough to close all of the afterdecks to passengers. I began to feel nauseous, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to teach my last Moby Dick class at 2:15 in the afternoon. Retiring to our cabin, I lay down in bed for about an hour, while the ship repeatedly slammed into much higher seas. I eventually felt enough to try my sea legs and headed back to the snack bar on deck 7. A strawberry smoothie settled my stomach as I sat on a deck chair and kept seasickness at bay by breathing fresh air and looking at the horizon. But the waves were much higher and the wind speed increasing. My students turned in their papers, and I let them go early since their thoughts were focused on field trips in Japan the next day. But I had another engagement at 4 p.m. with a group of lifelong learners about Moby Dick in the main dining room on deck 5. About 12 adult students showed up, and I began my presentation. I led my students through the main elements of the plot and decided to read aloud parts of the final paragraphs of the novel. After Moby Dick rams the Pequod, Melville wrote, quote, "And now a concentric circle sees the lone boat itself, and all its crew, and each floating oar, and every lance pole and spinning, animate and inanimate, all around and round in vortex, carried the smallest ship of the Pequod out of sight." No sooner had I finished reading "carried the smallest ship of the Pequod out of sight" than our ship went into a very severe lurch to port, while simultaneously the bow dove down deeply into an oncoming wave. The props vibrated with tooth-chattering power that made the whole ship tremble. In slow motion, my students began to slide away from the table. Their chairs slowly tipped backwards, and one after another, like collapsing dominoes. They all fell towards the carpeted floors. Their fall looked like a choreographed, artfully planned tumble. Fortunately, no one was hurt. After picking themselves up and realigning their chairs around the table, we laughed at the incredible timing of my reading. Given that the seas were becoming noticeably rougher, I almost decided to call the session off, but they wanted me to continue. And I did, by reading the incredibly beautiful, haunting, and prophetic lines of the last lines of the novel. And I'll read to you from Moby Dick. "But as the last whelmings intermixingly poured themselves over the sunken head of the Indian at the mainmast, leaving a few inches of the erect spar yet visible, together with the long streaming yards of the flag, which calmly undulated with ironical coincidings over the destroying billows they almost touched. At that instant, a red arm and hammer hovered backwardly, uplifted in the open air. In the act of nailing the flag faster and yet faster to the subsiding spar, a skyhawk that tauntingly had followed the main truck downwards from the natural home among the stars, pecking at the flag and incommoding Tashtigo there. This bird now chanced to intercept its broad, fluttering wing between the hammer and the wood, and simultaneously feeling that ethereal thrill, the submerged savage beneath, in its depth grasp, kept his hammer frozen there. And so the bird of heaven, with archangelic shrieks, in its imperial beak thrust upwards, and his whole captive form folded in the flag of Ahab, went down with the ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell till she had dragged a living part of heaven along with her, and helmeted herself with it. Now small fowls flew screaming over the yet yawning gulf. A sullen white surf beat against the steep sides. Then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on as it had rolled 5,000 years ago. At the end of that concluding sentence, and you guessed it, another and a stronger wave hit the ship. Unoccupied chairs flipped over, plates crashed to the floor. My students were thrown more violently from their seats. Again, no one was hurt. On this note, quite good-humoredly, one of my students said to the group, "John, you really know how to cue the elements to enhance the storyline. What timing, and to do it twice. Quite incredible." But that was the end of the gathering. The captain got on the PA system to announce that all classes were canceled for the rest of the afternoon and evening, that no one would be allowed to go out on any outside decks until further notice. The pre-Japan arrival program was curtailed, and we were advised to retire to our rooms and secure any loose items. And then, of course, was the story, which I had already told you about. I would like just a few words to say about the lifelong learners who were on board ship. I think I may have mentioned this once before, but they became adjunct faculty for us. Some of them were really marvelous, and still stay in touch with some of them to this day, because they were so open to the students, open to the faculty, and even the 2015 voyage, which has a remarkable number of lifelong learners. It wasn't quite the same as that first group, which were people who had been around the world before. And as I may have mentioned, they'd seen the Hollywood shows and they've had the fine wine, And they wanted to be with students, they wanted to be teachers themselves, and they were magnificent indeed. Also, last week, wanted to mention something to you about our captain. And I'm going to refer to our captain of the 2015 voyage, which was Captain Costas. But our captain for the voyage in the MV Explorer was Captain Jeremy Kingston. And at one point in our voyage, I wanted to invite the captain to come to my class. And in that voyage, I had 30 students. 30 students who barely packed into it was really, really tight. I had one student who was right next to a potted plant, and I could barely see her, so we called her the potted plant. I could see her hand going up over the potted plant. Exactly. So the potted plant was a brilliant student, actually, and she took the joke rather well, but it was so tightly packed in there. It was like a sardine. Let me set this up for you in a way that will make it kind of entertaining. This is coming into port on board MV Explorer, and then I will talk about the captain. 2 days out of Singapore, the distinctive authoritative voice of Captain Jeremy Kingston rang out over the ship's PA system at around 11 a.m. His voice, with its British accent, commanded instant attention. I felt like standing up and couldn't help but hear the strains of Rule Britannia in my ears. Without any warning, the ship made a sudden sharp turn to starboard. I was in the faculty lounge with a 180-degree view of the Andaman Sea. The ship banked so hard to starboard that looking out over the starboard windows, you could see only the green sea to port and only the blue sky on the other side. Such was the heel. All of us went out on deck to watch what I later learned is called a Williamson turn, maritime nomenclature for a 360-degree man overboard rescue operation. Those with binoculars spotted Oscar, the nickname that was given to the inflated inflated lifelike dummy who looked like Mr. Bibb, the Michelin Man, in the bright orange life vest that had been thrown overboard. This drill was meant to be as realistic as possible for everybody on board ship. None of the crew were informed in advance of the man overboard drill. Only Captain Jeremy and Staff Captain Korny Polikarpov, specially charged with safety at sea, were in the know. And Jim Van Arsdale, I think you'll remember this too, perhaps. Another passenger spotted an orange life ring that had been thrown into sea a few minutes after Oscar fell overboard. The ship continued its bank turn, then reduced speed and slowly approached Oscar. Many of us felt and even expressed genuine feelings of panic and concern for Oscar as we got closer to him, quote unquote him. He could have been any one of us. Lying on his back, with his forelimbs outspread, limbs that were swollen with air, was Oscar perhaps a rotting corpse in reality? Was it too late? Next, we noticed that one of the bright orange motorized and completely enclosed rescue vessels had been lowered from its davits and was heading for Oscar. One crew member at the helm stern, the other carrying a boat hook amidships. After 2 failed attempts to hook Oscar, he was finally gathered within the Good Shepherd's crook, pulled to the side of the lifeboat and lifted aboard. Applause and cheers went up spontaneously from all of the people and students on the deck that had gathered at the ship's rails. And then over the PA system, attention, ship's company, attention, ship's company, man overboard drill has been completed. Ship's crew, please return to your duties. We apologize to our passengers for any inconvenience you may have experienced. And I put this in my journal and then I added, no apologies needed, Captain. We felt reassured that we were in good hands. Jeremy Kingston. Let me tell you a little bit about him. A reticent, maybe even a shy man, Captain Jeremy looks the role of a ship's master. Over 6 feet tall, stocky with close-cropped hair, and a fair peaches and cream complexion, he exudes authority and confidence. Always dressed in his uniform, immaculate pressed white slacks, white shirt, with gold fringe epaulets. He who must be obeyed, and is, can be found every morning at his senior staff meeting near the rear of the main dining room on deck 5. Captain Jeremy is British and works aboard Explorer on a 6-month rotation and spends the other 6 months of his year at home with his wife in a village near Southampton, England. His wife does not like being at sea, he told me, but she will join him aboard Explorer in Casablanca and sail to Barcelona. Captain Jeremy will also be joined by several other members of his family. And once aboard, they will participate in a private ceremony at sea to lay to rest the ashes of his father. I thought it would be interesting to invite Captain Jeremy to my class, but it took some time and my adhering to strict paramilitary shipboard protocol. I had to write a formal letter to him by way of Jim Van Arsdale, the assistant dean. I don't know if you remember that, Jim, but I was told you just don't go and ask him, you write a formal letter. So I did. Thank you for telling me. It wouldn't have been appropriate for me to have gone to him directly, obviously. But more than that, Jim, the assistant dean, he requested that I write down the date, the time, the classroom number, and what I wanted him to talk about. So I was going to give him a script. So I did all of that. And lo and behold, the captain does not like surprises. Though ironically, his favorite public speaking format is the Q&A, a format that could contain some surprises. But there is not a Q he hasn't heard before, and so he has an A pretty well down pat. Fortunately, my students had just finished reading John McPhee's Looking for a Ship, which is one of the books I assigned for my class. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful, wonderful yarn. So they were primed with some knowledge and questions about the now, alas, pretty much defunct U.S. Merchant Marine. Knowing his time was limited, I asked the captain if he would spend about 30 minutes with us. He stayed, not just for 30 minutes, but for the full 75 minutes, and enchanted everyone. My students had a major project due in Ghana, an 8 to 10 page personal sea narrative, recounting what they had seen and learned aboard ship, with special emphasis on how the voyage had changed them. One of my students asked Jeremy, "How has being at sea changed you?" I don't think he had ever been asked this question before. His pink peaches and cream complexion experienced a red shift. He responded quite candidly. After stammering a bit, I was a shy person when I was a boy, still am maybe, but being ship's master has given me huge self-confidence. I am in charge here. I have a great staff, but I am the master. I have to know everything about this ship, but it may surprise you to know that much of my day is spent on paperwork. I keep my papers stacked on the desk of my office just off the bridge. I know where everything is. During the night of the big storm, the night before our arrival in Yokohama, one of the 35 to 40-foot waves rolled Explorer so far over that all my homework slid off the desk and onto the floor. I gave up on the paperwork and spent the rest of that long night on the bridge, strapped to a chair and observing the seas. I have been at sea for over 35 years, in all kinds of vessels, in all kinds of foul weather. The storm off Japan was the second worst storm I have experienced in my career. I've heard about the commanding presence of Captain Jeremy in action. One day, in port, a guest of one of the passengers tried to board the ship without going through the very strict protocol and advanced security checks that are required. Reportedly, this guest was used to having his own way. He was put off by what he considered the crew's harassment of him. He went to the purser's deck on deck 5 and began to berate the kind and gentle Filipino lady who was on duty. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded in a loud, accusatory tone. "I'm sorry, sir, but these are the rules," she responded. "But this is absurd. I demand to be let aboard. Just who do you think you are?" Little did this man realize that Captain Jeremy was attending a meeting in an office adjacent to the purser's station. The master of the Explorer came out of his office and in a commanding stentorian tone that brooked no rebuttal, "Sir, I don't care who you are. Your behavior is to the purser is totally unacceptable, and you are also in violation of the ship's protocol and our security regulations. Get off this ship immediately. That's an order. Do you understand me, sir? The face of the Beaches Supreme, Captain Jeremy, was beet red. Master of the MV Explorer knows how to
Did I leave?
He left. Had no alternative. Jim, I don't know if you remember that's just an incident. I just happened to be there and watched it. And he was an interesting guy. And I appreciate you giving me the permission, the right way to get him to come to class, and that the fact that he really told us more than I think he ever intended to do. So that was a real wonderful thing. Also, from our 2015 voyage, some of the members of the crew I wanted to talk about before I moved to 2015. And I wrote the following. I think you might be interested in this. Members of the crew, I don't know what's been added to the drinking water in the crew's quarters, but something must have been added that the rest of the ship's company doesn't yet get through the reverse osmosis technology that alchemically turns seawater into purified water to drink. In general, most of the ship's company is a happy group of students, faculty, lifelong learners, and staff. But the crew is best characterized by their consistently upbeat attitude, their optimism and grace and politesse, and the fact that they know all our names. The crew addresses adult male passengers as Sir. I am Sir John. Women are Madame. Like the black-dressed puppet handlers in the Kabuki theater, our crew, waiters, room stewards, everyone, is almost invisible. So silently and efficiently do they go about their duties, rarely interjecting themselves into the lives of us passengers, unless invited to do so. But they are not servile automatons. Many of us have had the privilege of getting to know some of them, such as, here are the names. One didn't have a name. I have this image of him. The singing waiter from Jamaica on deck 6, who sang snippets of hymns one morning with Arch at breakfast. But he sings all the time, sotto voce, while he works, mostly religious songs about endurance, his happiness in being alive, his faith in Jesus, the beauty of the morning, the beauty of the evening. If we eat on deck 5 or at the snack bar on deck 7, he invariably asks, when we return to deck 6, "Where have you been, Sir John? I missed you." He had a rare day off in one of his ports recently, and we had lunch on deck 6. We missed him too. And then there's the crew member who hoses and swabs down the decks at 5 a.m. when I'm sitting with my coffee staring out to sea before sunrise. He and I are often the only ones on deck at that hour. He knows exactly where I usually sit and wonders what might have happened to me if I don't show up. Our communication is nonverbal. He swabs the deck. I meditate on the sea. But we have a silent communion of sorts. I nod my head as I toast the morning sun to him. Raising my cup of coffee, he lifts his handle of his mop like a verger's mace in silent acknowledgement of my presence and our dawn friendship. Putting his mop aside at 7 a.m., he turns into a waiter at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner, usually on the after deck, on deck 6. The other day, while Emily and I were finishing our meal on the after deck and enjoying the peaceful evening and sunset, my dawn friend came to take away our plates. "Where were you this morning?" he asked. Our first verbal exchange in weeks. "I spent part of the morning in Glacier Lounge," I said. "Well, I miss seeing you, staring out to sea." He gently fist bumped me on my shoulder, and we then exchanged a mutual fist bump. Fist to fist. I rose early that morning, toasted him with my cup. He raised his face in return. I tell these stories because they wouldn't be here if I hadn't wanted to capture that part of the experience. Now, in planning this last session, I realized that here I am as a teacher, and I'm referring to things that you haven't read. And I realized that if these books had been published, and maybe they should be, it would have been much easier, and I apologize for not anticipating this, if everyone had these volumes in hand. They just haven't been published, so it makes it very awkward. Hence why I'm trying to give you a flavor by reading some of the episodes that I go back to, because I find they're just a little touch of something that might have been lost otherwise during that voyage. So I hope this works for all of you.
What makes it real for you?
I hope it makes it,
for all of
I
us.
hope it makes it real for all of you. Any questions so far? Again, this format is not ideal, not the format of being here at the YMCA, but the format of my reading like this to you. But I try to give the flavor as best I can. And I have some more stories I would like to talk about, some of which I mentioned.
It's nice to be read to.
Yes.
Or you can fall asleep too if you want. I'm certainly entitled to that.
Georgia, would you talk about 2015, how we were worried on the Mediterranean? You're coming up.
Yeah, the 2015 voyage.
Can I say
Sure,
something?
absolutely, please. do.
Yeah, I just, I'm appreciating it through you. And I did watch the lecture, I did watch the videos, which were really horrific. And so I find myself using the word osmosis. I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm absorbing the overall experience sort of in different ways. And I'm knowing you and Emily, and I have come to empathize with your experience. And so these details, having you read it actually is almost better than having us read it. So I wouldn't apologize for the medium that you've given us, because it blends your image through you, your writing, and your voice to us, and we get a sense of it. We pick up which I think is the objective of what you're trying to give us. We can't absorb the whole experience twice repeated. You're coming to 2015, but we get the feeling of it with enough data to be able to, I think, get the impact.
And it puts us all together with that, whereas if we had, when you have a room of people, maybe somebody read it and somebody didn't, or maybe someone didn't remember it, and to just refer to it isn't the same as reading it. I think it was a good idea.
Good.
And to the point somebody said, it's nice to be read to, it reminded me of being a child and having my mother sit between my sisters in my room when we both had measles. And she read The Last of the Mohicans to us. And we listened. And when she finished, we wanted her to read more.
It's just the way a book is supposed to be.
So we've lost that habit, I think, of listening to somebody read. And it's impactful. It's out of sync today with today's culture. Everything is go, go, go. But the truth is that it's a vibrant way of empathizing, absorbing, feeling information that is different from reading it even on the printed page.
Thank you. If that's okay with you all, I'll continue in that regard.
Did you have something to add?
I was just going to say that I've heard so many adults who were read to in school each day by their teacher, remembered for the rest of their lives. And today, at least in public schools, like there's no time for that. You know, it's not in the lesson plan as would be, but it's life changing.
It is. It is. I was fortunate, and maybe some of you were fortunate to have stories read to you by members of your family. My father was a brilliant reader. He loved to read stories aloud. And my brother also loved it. The whole family did. He was very dramatic when he would read aloud. And as I got older, I wanted to read aloud to others. And I do that with Emily a lot. Emily loves to have stories read to her. And sometimes she goes to sleep, but oftentimes she just likes it. And I find it a wonderful way to share something, a book or a passage or something. I can't just keep it in. I want, hey, Emily, listen to this. And she very kindly listens, perhaps when she would rather do something else, but she puts on the appearance of really enjoying it.
We lie together.
That's right, indeed. Let's see. Let me tell you a little bit about our new ship. She is, and I'm going to read here, took a while getting used to her, this new ship. By the way, The itinerary, I should let you know, was on this, it was on the screen, but it doesn't have to be. I want to let you know where we were going in 2015. We got on board in Southampton, England. I flew over from Baltimore to London Heathrow, and then visited some very, very good friends of ours in Cambridge University for several days before our trip. While we were there, we also took the Eurostar, the train that goes under the tunnel to England, to France, excuse me. And we visited some friends that we had known since I was a Fulbright Fellow teaching American literature in Clermont-Ferrand, France. So it was a wonderful reunion. But after getting on board in Southampton, our next port of call was Civitavecchia, Italy, which is the port of Rome. We then went to Naples, and we were going to go to Istanbul, but the State Department called that suggested that it was not safe, which was unfortunate because that was one of the ports that we were all expecting to go to, really looking forward to, perhaps because of its just sheer exotic nature between East and West. So at some point, I would love to go by sea, love to go to Istanbul. But we made a detour to Dubrovnik in Croatia. And as soon as we arrived there, it was a hit. A lot of us faculty members had to change course. They were planning to talk about Istanbul. I was too. I had a whole curriculum worked up, and that had to be put aside. It could be filler. This is what you missed. But Dubrovnik was a perfect place for us to go to, and it was a wonderful experience for many of the students. So I think they acclimated quite well. From Dubrovnik, Croatia, we went to Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, Greece, then to Valencia, Spain, Barcelona, Casablanca, Morocco, Dakar, Senegal, and then from Dakar, as I mentioned before, we sailed across the ocean to Brazil, and then into the Mediterranean, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, the Panama Canal Transit, and stay in Punta Arenas in Costa Rica, and then from Costa Rica, nonstop back to San Diego. So really the 2013 voyage, this completed the whole really truly round the world voyage, because the first one we went from San Diego up to Tokyo, and then east, and then this voyage was starting Barcelona and going west, and to return back to San Diego. So it brings up the whole question of, this wonderful voyage, and here you have this journey, and you come back to where you were before. Around the world voyage, and I have a quote here about that I hope I can find. I will use that. I dedicated this book specifically to Sharon Hostler, who was the academic dean who hired me, and unfortunately she's not available to be in class today. But this is very heartfelt dedication. I call it an epistle dedicatory.
She was the one who was with us last week.
She was with us last week. She was the one that hired everybody. Thank God it hired me. I want to thank her again. She took a risk.
Yeah.
Dedicated teacher and physician, noted scholar and humanist, avid student, gifted writer, unflappable and respected administrator. Your love for travel and adventure and your wisdom, humor, and graciousness have made you a beloved friend and mentor to me and to many. With admiration and affection, this Sea Journal is dedicated to Sharon L. Hostler, MD, Academic Dean, Semester at Sea, fall of 2015. I'm hoping somehow, Sharon, we can get some of our Semester at Sea people together again. You've got to come a long way, Jim and Nancy, but maybe there's a way. It would be fun to do.
Yeah.
Let me read you this preface to this part of the voyage and why it was different. On November 4th, 2013, I received a call from Sharon Hostler at the University of Virginia, who served as academic dean for our first semester at Sea voyage in 2013. She announced that she had just been appointed as academic dean for the fall 2015 voyage. And she inquired, are you interested in serving again as a member of the faculty? Or was 2013 enough? Should we have a conversation soon? I put down the phone, talked to Emily for 3 minutes. After speaking with Emily, I made a reply, yes, we're very interested.
It took
Let's
3
talk.
minutes.
So that was I had no idea. When we were still digesting the 2013 voyage and then be asked to go back in 2015. This voyage of Atlantic exploration, beginning in Southampton, is going to be a very different one. As Shannon always tell people, that the voyage you had once before, no matter whether you're going to the same waters, the people who are part of the faculty, the staff, are going to create an ethos that's unique to that particular experience. Yes. Oh, Peggy, do you have a comment? I'm sorry. No? Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I should be looking up. If any of you see someone waving to me or wanting to say something, I'll stop. Our 2015 voyage will also be the next to the last semester at sea voyage with the University of Virginia as its academic sponsor. After a 10-year partnership, UVA decided to end its affiliation with Semester at Sea and its parent organization, the Institute for Shipboard Education. I should add that before it was at the University of Virginia, it was for 24 years at the University of Pittsburgh, which is where our younger daughter first had her experience with Semester at Sea that changed her life in really significant ways, which I spoke about last time. Beginning in the fall of 2016, the Semester at Sea voyage will have the academic partnership with Colorado State University. Other changes for our 2015 voyage include the Institute for Shipboard Education inauguration of a new business model and a shakedown cruise aboard a different vessel. Our beloved MV Explorer from spring 2013 was sold, and the Institute for Shipboard Education contracted to charter the elegant German-built cruise ship MS Deutschland. Semester at Sea would charter the vessel for 2 voyages per year under the ship's new SAS name, MV World Odyssey. For non-SAS voyages, World Odyssey would revert to her original name, Deutschland. Before we departed Southampton, there was a quayside celebration attended by the whole ship's company. The name World Odyssey was unveiled in blue, bold letters on her prow and stern, and a bottle of champagne broken against her prow. But the original name, Deutschland, could still be seen underneath the less than perfect whitewashing it received, presumably to make it easier for our dual personality ship to transition back to her birth name. Our 2015 voyage was different in other ways as well. Now veteran Semester at Seers, Emily and I knew that what we were in for as teachers and as lifelong learners. I deliberately challenged myself to develop an entirely new curriculum for my course entitled The Sea and the Mirror. And I have the whole syllabus, but I'm not going to go over there. I could easily have used the syllabus from the previous voyage, given that there are so many narratives and novels and poems about vessels at sea, but I wanted to connect my reading assignments and the syllabus directly with the ports of call. And I'm going to give one example of that. I could have easily used that, but I decided to, in favor of, to make this more of an educational experience for me by assigning plays, short stories, essays, and novels that were completely new to me, or almost new to me. In many ways, I think teachers are really at the top of their game when they're only a few pages ahead of their students, because they're learning at the same time. Maybe I bring a level of sophistication or better knowledge about how the story or poem might fit into a larger context. But to learn right with students is a real marvelous thing. And it does mean your time off on board ship is highly limited. Without this voyage, I might not otherwise have immersed myself in research on primary documents about the transatlantic slave trade. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Of the transatlantic slave trade, including Olaudah Equiano's interesting narrative, or studied the poetry and plays of Derek Walcott, the poems of Edouard Glissant, and Noursobe Say, Philippe, stories by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and monographs about the culture and history of the Caribbean by anthropologist Sidney Mintz, whose introduction to anthropology course I took my freshman year in college 55 years ago. My other role in this voyage was as director of the writing studio. During the days that we were at sea, the studio was open for 1.5 hours in the early afternoon and 1.5 hours in the evening. Open to the whole ship's company, the studio encouraged writing of all kinds. Although our primary clients were undergraduates who wanted assistance with their course essays, my colleagues and I broadened the mission to include all forms of oral and written expression. For me and for my teaching assistants, our one-on-one interaction with students, faculty, and lifelong learners exceeded our expectations. To assist those who needed help and to encourage them were a great source of joy. So too was our surprise at finding and discovering some really impressive literary talent. Also different on this voyage was my increased participation in faculty panels and delivering several lectures before the whole ship's company on topics ranging from the transatlantic slave trade to the maritime traditions of rendering assistance to those in peril on the sea. That came up because I wrote in a journal elsewhere that we could see history really unfolding in front of us. Students were concerned about the massive emigration across the in the Mediterranean. They were concerned about what the ship's captain would do if he were to see a ship moving from Africa or Iceland, a small raft. Would they stop? And in fact, we had a discussion with the Captain Costas in this voyage about what the duty is of a ship assisting people at sea, which is, unless you're endangering yourself, you are abided by universal law to lend assistance. And because we did see some of these vessels, and it was a real concern. It was as if we were sailing into history. Things were changing, and we still know about this immigration camp, trying to get into Greece, trying to get into Great Britain, getting out of these other countries which are either run by autocrats and I'm going to talk at one point.
So did he bring people on board? Did he bring some?
No, we didn't have to. We didn't have to.
Oh, they didn't
They
want
were
to.
all right. They were all right. But it was the concern for that. It was in the news. And also during this voyage, it was during the Paris bombings. There was, I've forgotten how many people were killed. Students were aware of all of that. And
And the Euro train, the people that were walking on
exactly,
the truck.
people trying to get back to getting into England from France. It was just the beginning of all of this, and now we see it full time. So it was a very different voyage. Let me read to you specifically. I wanted to talk about focusing on some water. One of our ports was obviously coming into harbor in Naples. And I titled this "A Night on Bald Mountain," or "An Afternoon on the Monte Vesuvio," a one-act play, 7 scenes. And this was a voyage, not voyage, this was a journey up to the very summit of the caldera of Mount Vesuvius. Many of my students were in that class, several faculty members, and a whole lot of people from all over the world who wanted to climb Mount Vesuvius, thinking it would be a piece of cake. So I do take some license here. I turned this into a little story, but everything that's about is essentially true. Scene 1 at 9 a.m., September 25th, several semester at sea faculty and students departed by bus for Vesuvius, quite visible in the morning light from the deck of the ship. Scattered patches of mist occasionally shroud the summit on an otherwise warm and cloudless day. Scene 2. A large motor coach with 22 aboard heads for the autostrada into the Neapolitan suburbs, past large and stately houses with walled gardens and fruit trees perched on the lower slopes of Vesuvius. Exiting the highway, the coach slowly gains elevation and drives on increasingly narrower roads. Stately homes become fewer and far between, replaced by derelict pizza joints, boarded up restaurants and cafes, and occasional tired and run-down pensiones and small hotels. The voice of our tour guide. Real estate values have plummeted on the slopes of Vesuvius, driven not only by the stagnant economy, but also by location, location, location. Beautiful, scenic, but lethal. Monte Vesuvio was one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes. Its magma chamber is massive and located only 7 miles deep. It's an explosive Plinian volcano, like St. Helens, and overdue for an eruption. This is the most densely populated volcanic region in the world, with more than 3 million people clustered around its base. Scene 3. I was beginning to feel a little perspiration. Narrow roads and hairpin turns require drivers' perpetual vigilance. Italian sports cars cruise these roads as if they were a private speedway. Honking of horns, the coaches having to back down, and what looked like ox cart trails to allow other buses to descend. Much gesticulating, swearing, and Latin bravado. Looking downward, Naples begins to fade away in the distance, though visible periodically as shifts of sunlight penetrate the morning mists and illuminate the sea in parts of the city. Clouds begin to form on the previously cloudless day, dark gray laden with water vapor. The outside temperature drops precipitously. The coach slows to a crawl and cautiously winds through mountains, valleys, lush with bushes, vines, and trees that form a fan vault of the roadway. Suddenly, the coach breaks clear of the tree line. Mists become heavier. The landscape, a craggy and vertiginous wasteland of razor-sharp rock outcroppings with motionless shapes and scattered boulders with low-lying vegetation rooting itself in desperation. Napoli has disappeared completely. Sweaty palms and adrenaline, rush of fear. What if? What if? That's not good. Scene 4. The coach reaches the end of the road, a crowded car park where buses disgorge cruise ships tourists from all over the world. Tourists don their jackets, if they were smart enough to bring them. Walk past tawdry souvenir shops with pieces of lava for sale that can be picked up right from the ground in front of you. WCs that require coins to enter, plus a tip to an attendant who dutifully but ineffectively swabs the booth's filthy floor after each use. And then, steeply crisscrossing above base camp, ascends a pathway steeply upward as far as one's eyes can see to the outer view edge of the caldera. A 40-minute walk, advertised as only 10 minutes for an 18 to 20-year-old perhaps. The pilgrimage begins. Lots of chatter, joking among Vesuvio's pilgrims that rapidly gives way to strenuous breathing and silence from talk, from the struggle of climbing up a rubble-strewn pathway. Scene 5. Some pilgrims think better of the ascent and return to base camp, many using hiking poles for sale on the descent. Those with and without warm or waterproof jackets complain of the cold, the surrounding mists and the occasional droplets of rain, and no view of Napoli. What's the point? Only a caldera moonscape with precipitous valleys cascading downwards. Reaching the extreme verge of the caldera, the land gives way to a vast and deep boulder-strewn depression of Vesuvio's crater. Steam venting from cracks in the rock mixes with the mist and fog, and now increasingly darkening clouds move in on the summit. The wind velocity picks up, making the temperature feel much colder at 4,000 feet above sea level. Scene 6. As the swirling, increasingly dense clouds blot out more of the sun's thin rays, it turns darker. A brilliant lightning bolt strikes nearby, followed by a loud clap of thunder that reverberates on the surrounding rocks. More thunder and lightning. Our previously sunny day turns into Bulwer Lytton's dark and stormy night. Tourists abandon the caldera and walk or run downhill. Then the rain begins. Torrents of rain, lurid, bolts of lightning and deadening thunderclaps. The pathway turns into a stream, a waterfall, a turgid mix of water, mud, and sandy lava fragments. Pools of water fill in the footprints of the pilgrims descending to whatever haven might be provided by the tourist vendors' shacks down below. The wind whips up to greater velocity. Sleet and hail mix with rain, larger hailstones, pelt the pilgrims and leave a thin coating of white pellets on the ground. Those without rain gear are soaked to the skin, cold. One souvenir stand is overrun with those seeking some kind of shelter, often not more than a bamboo-like roof or a brise soleil that affords no protection to the elements. Some pilgrims think this is great fun, the ultimate experience. Most terrified. A rugged Russian pilgrim and this delicate Dutch girlfriend break open 2 small bottles of vodka and share one of the bottles with me and with Paul Shepard. We each took generous draughts of the warm to warm ourselves up, our complexions soon flushed with the spirits. Rumble thy belly full, spit fire, spout rain. Have we aroused the wrath of Vesuvio? Is this the promised end or image of that horror? Things that love night, love not such nights as these. The wrathful skies gallow the very wanderers in the dark and make them keep their caves. Since I was a man, such sheets of fire, such bursts of hard thunder, such groans of roaring wind and rain I never remember to have heard. Man's nature cannot carry the affliction nor the fear. And as rapidly as the storm began, it departs. While there is no jolly tabard inn to welcome the pilgrims back from their base camp, they are heartened by the rays of sunlight gradually piercing the gloom and revealing far below the city, the Bay of Naples, the sun-baked Mediterranean beyond. Aboard ship, C7, aboard ship at Naples. Pilgrims head to their cabins for a warm shower, then return to the sun-bathed decks, order the late lunch of hamburgers, French fries, and fruit smoothies. And the Vesuvio tales begin to spread throughout the ship's company like a virus. No hyperbole, no truth, all truth, the stuff of myth. Maybe it's just as well we depart happily in the evening before Vesuvio releases its lava, its pyroclastic flows, and all the scorching wind to let us know just how we poor naked wretches we really are. Poor naked wretches, wherever so you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm. How shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed readiness defend from seasons such as these? Oh, I've taken too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel. Thou mayst shape the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. And meanwhile, Emily was down in Herculaneum, I think it was Herculaneum, exploring one of the ruins. So we had 2 very, very different experiences on that particular day. I have to ask you, how was our time? We had 10?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Boy, I'm so sorry. There's so
John, that was wonderful.
Oh, thank
I mean,
you.
it was as if we were there. Thank you so much.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to share this with you. As I've said, I read these to Emily every once in a while because we forget what we've done. And we think, gosh, did we really do that?
We do that.
The answer is yes, it is. Yes, we did.
No, it's a figment of our imagination.
Exactly. Oh, another one. I think this would be I have a whole series of things I could tell you. But this is a particularly funny one. This is.
It's making you
Here we go.
laugh talking about it.
This is a Croatian wine tour with the Plaid Avenger and vintner Ivan Miloš. Now, this was a real course, and you'll see why.
It wasn't planned.
It was not planned. No, this gentleman who was on the faculty, who was a wine expert, we're going to have a wine tour when we were in Istanbul, and that had to be scrapped. So he was busy trying to find something for us to do, or at least for a field trip. An hour's bus ride outside Dubrovnik took us through spectacular countryside along back roads that skirted rocky coastline and dropped off precipitously to the sea below. Along cliffs above us, wire netting has been installed to prevent avalanches of stone screeds and blocking the narrow road. Quite suddenly, the landscape changed ahead of us. Still the pervasive, brilliant white rock from the reflected rays of the sun. But surrounding us on rock terraces built by hand were rows and rows of olive trees and vineyards. The vines were small and didn't need to be trellised, a procedure done with vines in less sunny climes. But here the sun is intense, it's dry. The vines have roots that tap deep into the calcareous soil. We arrived at the world headquarters of winery Miloš, a small family-owned boutique or cult vineyard, and are greeted by the handsome 40-ish vintner, Ivan Miloš. He invites us all inside the working part of his home, gives us a brief history of Croatian wines. Happily, he said, for a boutique winery such as this, Croatia's being part of the European Union has been a boon. The French Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, or AOC certification, is now required for all select wines in Europe. This designation attests the authenticity of the specific region where the grapes are grown. It's a master of terroir that makes up the soil and the microclimate that gives regional wines their unique taste. After taking us through the caves and their huge oak barrels where they are storing various wines, we went into a spacious tasting room and sat down on benches. This is where the fun began. While the Platavenger, our own Professor John Boyer, didn't know Ivan Miloš, the two of them hit it off immediately. One wine connoisseur appreciating the skills of a confrère in the fraternity of enophiles. While John has traveled the world as a wine expert, this was his first time in Croatia, and he had to put our tour together with little preparation after Istanbul was removed from the itinerary. We began our tasting with a rosé wine. I avoid them, as they bring back vivid memories of Lancer's Rosé of my graduate school days. Maybe that's familiar to some of you. Sweet, cheap, and bottled in a brick red colored ceramic flask that we 1960s folk turned into Lance after the wine was consumed. And notice recognition. My wine tastes have definitely changed. Lancer's Rosé was just awful. Not good red, but gut rot. Sweet cheap, its future as a lamp being its only merit. But this Croatian rosé was a palate opener for me. Slightly chilled, I swirled it around in my glass as instructed by the Platavenger. He was called the Platavenger because he wore a plaid jacket all the time. Students called him. Noticed the nose and the colorful drapery of the curtains on the side of the glass. Taste, well, it was full-bodied, complex, but also light. Had I been blindfolded so as not to see the pinkish color, I would have sworn it was drinking a delicate red wine. This sure is the Lancer's Rosé of my grad school days, I blurted out, so all could hear. Platavenger, a grad student once himself, knew exactly what I was talking about. And he said, rosé wines can be delicious. That was my takeaway. I asked for another taste, and everybody laughed. Next, by contrast, a 12-year-old red wine that he served. Avenger took one taste and exclaimed, "Wow, you guys, oh my God, this is really good. You students don't know how lucky you are. Vintners almost never break open a bottle of wine that's 10 or more years old for a general tasting." Ivan smiled. Then Ivan and Avenger went off on an entertaining 15-minute riff of improv wine talk. Poetry, music, perfume, color, taste, a veritable mixture of all. And I end this little episode. Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep velvet earth, tasting of flora in the country green, dancing Provençal song, and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, blissful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim, and purple stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. That's a poem by John Keats. Ode on Nightingale. I'd like to conclude with what I think is perhaps the most important thing I could share with you. And that is my students writing 4 minutes. 4 minutes, oh boy. I have to send it to you. Nothing hard to do. Yep, I'll try. My students see void journals. If I get cut off, I get cut off. But I leave you with lots of thanks and gratitude for participating. Here's what they wrote about. One student wrote about her friendship with the adopted 10-year-old son of 2 days of two gay men in her neighborhood back home. After protracted court hearings, the couple won the right to adopt a child from Africa, and they named him Gilbert, aka Gilly. My student was very close to Gilly, and when he was growing up, she very movingly described the extraordinary trauma she suffered from personal fear that he would again be abandoned and passed on to another family. She became his principal babysitter and confidant. She was very concerned about leaving him for 3.5 months during her SAS voyage, and dreaded the day when she would have to tell him about her trip. Gilly cried and cried, and she couldn't console him until she came up with an idea. She took him to the local post office, where he told him that every week he would send him a postcard from one of the ports of call. Gilly, I will be physically away from you, but I'll always be thinking of you. And you can count each of my postcards knowing that when the final one arrives, Costa Rica, you will know that I'm on my way home. Another student wrote a series of beautiful poems, each inspired by her coming to terms with the reality that her mother, who has been a serious alcoholic for many years, was recently diagnosed with terminal cirrhosis of the liver. As the eldest child in her family, my student was overcome with guilt about undertaking this voyage. But it was she who could handle her mom better than any of her siblings, even better than her father. For all of them were deeply afraid of her when she became mean and aggressive. My student's poems were exquisitely crafted. They were beautiful. The fact that she felt she could share this was an extraordinary act on her own part. And there were several others, and I don't have time to put them all down here. One of my students suffered from chronic depression. An illness brought on largely by a sports injury caused by a serious concussion that landed her in the hospital for a week. I didn't know her history until I read her sea diary, but I noticed that her total lack of affect in class. I spoke to her privately about her concerns. My concerns. Are you okay? I asked. She explained she didn't like the class. She didn't like this stuff. This stuff doesn't interest me, she explained in an emotionless monotone. I said I was sorry about that. But given that she could transfer to another course, she had to take at least 4 courses to remain aboard ship. At her best, as revealed in her diary, turned out to be a revelation, a profile in courage, a self-described obsessive compulsive student. She described the whole trip as seeing ruins of no interest to her, but it was in Dubrovnik that she did something quite radical for this over-planner and depressed young woman. She struck out on her own. She left her faithful traveling companions behind and started just following their notes, guided by no master plan other than just to explore. She boarded a public bus and went out into the rural areas outside Dubrovnik. She walked alone, stopping occasionally at coffee houses for a sip of jumbo, and enjoyed just sitting down and observing people and being alone with her own thoughts. She described a joyous upwelling of feelings as if she had reinvented herself, rediscovered herself. Her inner activity, if it can be called that, was truly transformative. While still suffering from bouts of depression, for which she takes medication, she willingly admits that she has undergone a change from a negative, even cynical, unimpressed college student to someone who's beginning to like herself, including the people around her who are not her usual cronies, maybe even the professor, though this might be asking too much. These are just a sample of extraordinary writing of these students. It was a privilege to read them and to find out, because I told the students what I wanted them to do. I didn't want them to tell me about the best restaurant or tell me about a site that they've seen. I wanted them to say, what's going on inside? What's going on inside? Because you have a ship like this, all with some 500 students, 400 students. Just think if all of them were able to write, what a different perspective. Even my journals are focused because this is me looking at something. Just think if you could have all of those students writing something about what was happening to them. Having fun, of course, that's part of it. But also, just like when I was on that converted Liberty ship. 5 seconds. Yes. Close. Okay, I better stop. Thank you all. I appreciate you being here. I hope we can see each other again.
Thank you, John.
John.
Thank you.
Nice to meet your shipmates.
Nice to meet you.